So it was February 2010. I was much younger, not much thinner, but a good bit thinner, and boarded a plane to go to Guatemala. And we arrived to build some houses in Guatemala. Nothing that I am equipped to do. But one job that they thought that I could do would to be move all the supplies from the road to the house. It's not like our driveways. You can see a couple pictures there. So we had to first we moved some sand. And when the pile of sand was gone, I was very relieved because carrying two 5-gallon pails full of sand, about 50 yards one way, on some weird terrain, some of which was being watered. The onion fields were being watered as we were moving through them, and then the sand was gone, and I thought, great, we're finally done. And then the stone aggregate showed up. And then after the stone aggregate, we got to put down our 5-gallon pails, and we picked up cinder blocks instead, carrying one cinder block in each hand, 50 yards to the site. But we had American ingenuity, right? So we can certainly engineer this better. Do you think that worked? No. About 10 yards down the way, the whole thing collapsed, and they ended up carrying them brick by brick again. But we had some people there to tell us how to do this. We had some helpers around town who, for them, this was no big job. In fact, some of them would put 3 of those on their back stacked up like this. And they learned that from their parents, who would be carrying these huge bundles for miles and miles and miles between the various villages in Guatemala. So I was happy when we finally moved all the cinder blocks, but then some other stones showed up. And it went on that way the entire week. And we constantly thought we could figure out a better way so we didn't have to carry the weight of all this with us. And it reminded me this week of this story that we're going to talk about that Clark read from Mary Magdalene and the weight that she carried with her. This is our first week in a new series. We're calling it The Third Day. It's based on our bishop's book by the same title, The Third Day. There's copies available over here if you'd like one. And at the coffee and conversation for the next 6 weeks, we will be discussing each one of the chapters. This is the season of Eastertide, and the paraments are white or gold to match with that. And we celebrate the season of Easter, but often, I'll be honest with you, we don't really do a great job of that in the church. We focus a lot in Lent, right? And looking in on ourselves. We focus a lot on the cross. And even out in the culture of the church, right? We talk a lot about Jesus dying on the cross for our sins, and we talk about the brutality of that. But we talk about the resurrection a lot less, it seems like to me. You know, we have, the bishop recognized we have gold crosses, right? So we have the instrument of torture that we wear around our necks. Maybe we should think about wearing an empty tomb around our neck instead of a cross, right? Don't get rid of your crosses, but it's just interesting, right? We don't always celebrate the resurrection. So for the next 6 weeks, we're going to really have Easter for the next 6 weeks. It's all right. No candy, though, Eli. Sorry, okay? I could probably get some candy. Just come see me, okay? So we're going to have Easter. We're going to sing Easter songs, okay? We're going to use the Easter benediction that we use at Easter time, and we're going to really have 6 more sessions of Easter, and we're going to be looking at how to live out the resurrection through the lens of 6 different characters. And today we're going to start with Mary Magdalene. And I was thinking about Mary. Now we're looking at the perspective from John's gospel, different from Mark's from last week, completely different. But But one thing is Mary Magdalene is one going to the tomb. And in John's version, Mary goes by herself very early in the morning. And I wonder if Mary might have been in this kind of fog, personal fog and maybe a literal fog that early in the morning. She's filled with dread as she's walking to the tomb, like weighed down, like I was weighed down with the aggregate probably, weighed down with things. It's dark still. She's walking to the tomb, expecting to be able to properly prepare Jesus' body for burial. She has these images of Jesus' arrest and trial and his beatings and his crucifixion that are imprinted on her mind. They're etched in her very soul. And then she spent the last 36 hours from sundown at 6 o'clock on Friday till sun up on Sunday. 36 hours she has spent agonizing and trying to relive and make sense of what she's experienced when she saw Jesus killed. Everything was so recent still and so raw for her. This trauma is just happened. And she has this juxtaposition of the perfection of Jesus. Why in the world would he have been taken from us? The perfection of Jesus juxtaposed against the total depravity of humanity, including those of Jesus' friends who ran away and hid, including herself. She stood by, but she stood at a distance as she watched her friend Jesus be killed. And now she's carrying this enormous weight, like a gigantic 5-gallon bucket. She's carrying this enormous weight of trauma with her, weight that she'd like to let go of, but weight that is still very much alive in her. And as she approaches the tomb, she sees this very large stone. The stone that sealed the tomb has been rolled away. And John's gospel then says that she ran right then to get Peter and John. If you're wondering in Gospel of John, the other disciple or the disciple whom Jesus loved, that's John. Not very humble John, okay? The disciple who Jesus loved was John, who wrote that himself. So she goes and gets Peter and John, and she says, they've taken the Lord from the tomb. And Peter and John take off toward the tomb. They're immediately running, and Mary's not far behind. But as the men are examining the inside, they get to the tomb, and they're examining the inside of the tomb. Mary is standing outside, and she's crying, trying to make sense of everything that's going on and making sense of this latest development of the stone being rolled away. It's not what she had planned for today. She wanted to ensure that Jesus' body was properly cared for. It was laid to rest. That's part of our culture, part of the humanity's culture to take care of the dead. I remember when I was serving in the hospital, and part of my role would be when we had a death is somebody had to be with the body, and if the nurses and staff members were busy, that somebody got to be me, who, until they came for the morgue, I would sit with the body and make sure it was taken care of. She just wanted to take care of her friend, Jesus, properly. The third day was finally her opportunity to express her love and care and respect for her teacher, and to anoint his body for burial. She was carrying the weight of grief as well. So she had this trauma of seeing all that happened, and she had this weight of grief after her spiritual leader had died, and she just wanted to be close to him again. You ever experience that kind of grief where you lose somebody close to you and you just want to be near them again? Occasionally when I'm in the car, I still will kind of reach for my phone occasionally, because that was always the time when driving was when I called my mom. And occasionally I'll reach for that phone and go, can't call my mom. She's carrying this weight of grief, and although Jesus told his followers what would happen, that he would die and then would be raised 3 days later, it was clear that they didn't really have a clue what was going on. They didn't understand what Jesus meant. They didn't understand and put the pieces together about his death and resurrection. They were certainly not planning, and Mary was not planning for the first Easter. She was not planning for a resurrection, even though Jesus told her exactly what was going to happen, and it did. She was not planning for that, and they were just trying to do the right thing. She just wanted to take care of his body. She just wanted to do the right thing and do the next faithful step. But this new development of the stone being rolled away and the body having gone, this confused and disrupted her grief. And it added to the weight she carried. She's carrying trauma and grief, holding her down. And all of this was triggering for Mary. Anybody have some triggers out there? Yeah. Think about your triggers. Then I think about my triggers. Yeah. Happiness, sadness, loneliness, boredom are some of my triggers. That says, go raid the refrigerator. Right? So all of this, though, all these pieces come together are triggering for Mary. Her name, Mary from Magdala. It is believed that Mary is from this Galilean town on the edge of the Galilean Sea called Magdala. And Magdala was a town of about 30,000 people known for fabrics and knowledge and skill in dyeing fabrics. And it's believed that Mary might have been involved in that trade. And when Jesus met her, though, she was not well. It was said that she was possessed by 7 demons. And biblical writers might have talked about demon possession in different ways. Really, they would call it demon possession, but it was probably some kind of mental illness, some kind of disease, like maybe epilepsy, perhaps. But it also could have been someone who was truly consumed with evil spirits. But this being 7 evil spirits, 7 demons, 7 is a very biblical number that means complete. And so we know that 7 demons had complete control over Mary Magdalene when she first met Jesus. And at some point early in Jesus' ministry, Jesus healed her. And at that point, she devoted her entire life to following him as one of his disciples, along with the other 12 and many more. And it was thought that she never married, possibly because of her demon possession, and never had children because of the same, and most likely worked in the trade of fabrics, in dyeing of fabrics, and may have had enough financial viability to support Jesus' ministry. Many of the women financially supported Jesus' ministry to make it happen. And she so wanted others to experience the ways that Jesus had transformed her life that she was willing to invest her time and her money and her reputation. We know very little about Mary other than this demon possession that's talked about in Luke chapter 8. And she was immensely grateful for Jesus healing her, that she became unbound to whatever disorder was binding her up and holding her back, and she experienced this amazing power of Christ to heal her. Saved her from her brokenness and her loneliness and isolation and chaos of her life. And she finally felt secure. She finally felt like she knew what her future was going to be, and she would no longer need to be a victim of her condition. Her gratitude sparked deep, deep devotion to Jesus. Now, you may have heard in your study and in learning that Mary Magdalene is sometimes said to have been a working woman, a woman of the night, a prostitute. But we're not really sure. There's nothing biblical that will back that up. There is Pope Gregory in 591 conflated some characters of various Marys from the Gospels kind of into one Mary, and just assume they are all women of that pursuit. And so Mary Magdalene, there's really no knowledge that we have that she was a prostitute, but still carries that label quite often. But she was most likely a single woman who had made some money in the fabric trade and supported and followed Jesus. So when she got to the tomb and that stone was rolled away, all these triggers started happening for her, even more than she had experienced. The body's not there. And the weight of anxiety, she has trauma and grief, and now the anxiety of Jesus is dead. Will my demons return? You ever had a thought? Someone important in your life, or something happens in your life, and something that you've conquered, something that you've been healed of, something that was a struggle for your past and is no longer. You ever had the fear that it's going to come back and grip your life as it did before? That's Mary. Jesus is gone. The person who healed me is gone. Will my demons come back? You know, some demons are of our own makings, addictions and relationships and perhaps trauma that's caused by us, or PTSD, sexual violence, prejudice, racial hostility. Some of those are things that we cause ourselves, and some of those are things that happen to us, and just anxiety gets poured on us. And it was no different for Mary. But finally, she musters the courage. She's crying outside of the tomb. She musters the courage to look into the tomb. And she goes in and she sees these two angels seated where Jesus' body had been placed. And they ask her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She says, "They've taken away my Lord, and I don't know where they put him." And then turning, Mary hears another voice behind her. She doesn't recognize it, but it's Jesus. And he too asks, "Why are you crying? Who are you looking for?" And she thinks he's the gardener. Can you just see like Mr. Green Jeans, Jesus back there, the gardener? She thinks he's the gardener, and she explains her search for Jesus again, and then Jesus just says, "Mary." And it grabs her attention immediately. With his voice, Mary's eyes are open to see Jesus as if for the first time, and she responds, "Rabboni," meaning teacher. And with that simple four-letter word of her name, all the fear and anxiety that she's carrying are gone. In an instant, she feels completely different. The weight of her anxiety and grief and trauma are lessened, and she is ready to move forward with Jesus. But he says, "Not yet. Go and tell the disciples what you've seen." You know, even when we have been healed of things from Jesus, even when we've let go of our trauma and our grief and our anxiety, loss can also cause fear and anxiety. And we may wonder, how will we carry on without these loved ones? Or how will we carry on when we've once experienced this? And will my demons return? That's where the hope of the resurrection comes in for us. Whatever Jesus said or did to Mary when he spoke that word, it brought her hope. It brought her hope. Our Bishop Tom Berlin says this in his book about this moment. He says, when she hears the resurrected Christ say her name, she is suddenly alive again. Just as she discovered new life in her first encounter with Christ, hearing Christ speak her name reawakens the hope and possibility she found in life with him. She's alive to hope, alive to discipleship, alive to the knowledge that the death she witnessed on the first day does not rule the third day. Did you hear that? The death she witnessed the first day does not rule the third day. He goes on to say, this is what resurrection does in our lives. It establishes hope that death has not ended the story. It brings us life in a more vital faith that the realization of God's power is ultimately victorious. This hope begins when we understand that while the resurrection is cosmic in scope, it's out there for the whole entire universe, changing the way we understand the rules of life and death for everyone, but it's also very particular and it's very intimate. It's a proclamation made to the masses, and it's also a whisper in your ear. So Mary is given hope in this moment of Jesus speaking her name. The resurrection tells us that death has not ended this story and that there is hope no matter what. Cosmic and particular, mass communication and intimate, just like someone whispering in your ear. You see, Jesus knows us. God is not impersonal or disinterested. No, God knows us just by our names. And he's calling out to us, just like he called out to Mary. He knows us and the weight we carry, and it enables us to trust him and to follow his voice. One last word from our bishop on hope. He says that this trust is critical to the importance of resurrection. A relationship with Jesus is not possible or helpful if it is only a memory of a teacher who is now dead. But the power of the resurrection is demonstrated when Jesus remains present in our lives. Hearing her name, Mary is stunned by the reality of the resurrection. You see, the resurrection of Jesus demonstrates his power over death. And if death cannot hold him in a tomb, there is no demon that she has ever struggled with that would not be able to be cast out again. Amen? If the tomb cannot hold Jesus, then there's not a demon that can stay within me. And it was this expression of hope that carried on from Mary's life. She became known as the apostle of hope. She became known as the apostle to the apostles because she was the one, the only one. For an instant, for a moment in the world, the entire cosmos, Mary was the only one who knew of the resurrected Jesus. She was the first follower of Jesus that saw the resurrected Jesus, and she was the apostle to the apostles in giving them this news. Because of her great gratitude and what Jesus had done for her, she began telling her story and the resurrection story to everyone, beginning with the disciples, and she went on and on and on, and she let go of the weight she was carrying. You see, Mary was vulnerable to share her story, her entire story, with the warts and everything. Even though it had some parts that didn't make her feel so good because of guilt and shame that she carried. You see, it's often the most real experiences of the resurrection that come at our very lowest points. Did you hear that? The most real experiences of the resurrection often happen at our lowest points in our lives. And if we're willing to be vulnerable, if we're willing to share all of ourselves, then this can become the most compelling story that we have of the good news. This can become our story of the good news. And so like Mary Magdalene, we need to do the same. We need to be vulnerable enough to share our stories, the whole thing. Not just the parts that make us feel good. Because someone needs to hear your story. Someone needs to hear your story because it's a lot like theirs. And they don't have any hope. But you've lived it. You've experienced the resurrection. You've experienced hope. And you've come out on the other side changed. And they need to hear that story because they don't see a way out. They don't even see the next faithful step. Friends, people need to hear your real story. They need to hear the story of someone who has had their kind of resurrection experience to give them hope for a new, full, and amazing life with Jesus Christ. Amen?